One of the interesting things about AI is that the very first thing it disrupted was programming. Now, the industry started by creating a new category of tools called low code or no code. And then things like GitHub Copilot and GPT started to change how developers program. It's a little bit ironic. Hey there, I'm your host, Ray Villalobos, a software engineer and senior staff instructor at LinkedIn Learning. And today I'm talking to Dennis Linkov. Dennis is a machine learning team lead at Voiceflow, which is a platform for designing conversational assistants using artificial intelligence. So, Dennis, can you talk a little bit about your journey in tech and how you chose to move into a leadership role?
For sure. So my journey in programming started off with video games, which is a little bit of a common story, I think. So I
Hmm.
was playing video games, and then I wanted to create some video games. Actually, I was playing Dragon Quest at the time, and I'm like, what if I build my own RPG? So started making some games, and I really liked the ability to iterate and build quickly. And I eventually moved into the mobile app space, building iOS and Android applications. So I did a little bit of freelance work there, worked for a couple local companies, and eventually I wanted to figure out how do more complicated applications work? How do those big applications you see on the web, whether they're banking or social media or whatnot, how do they work? So I worked a little bit more on the back end side, did some DevOps and cloud work, and then I ended up here at VoiceFlow leading the machine learning team. So it's been a pretty interesting journey going across the stack, but it's been fun so far.
That sounds like a really big jump. How did you go then? Like, I know you're a team lead and you're hiring people and you get to talk to people, like, especially as a mentor. How did you make that switch from, being a developer, a pure developer, to getting into something like, leading teams and stuff like that? That is a kind of not necessarily a tough transition, but I think it definitely changes you a little bit. Can you talk about that?
For sure. Yeah, I think the switch from individual contributor to manager is quite large. For me, I was actually doing various leadership activities throughout. So, starting in high school, we had a big debate community and a computer science club. So, organizing, providing feedback, coaching was, I guess, a day to day activity for me, even starting high school. And in university, I ran a student technology community at its peak, had 1,000 students involved. So that was an opportunity to figure out how do you work with teams, how do you lead people, how do you get things done. And as I was sort of formalizing my work experience, getting into the industry in the tech space, eventually opportunities came up where I could lead teams, manage co-ops, manage small teams, and yeah, at this point, it was sort of a gradual step up into the role I'm here today.
So today, do you still, get into code at all, or are you just pretty much managing teams now?
Yeah, I still code quite a bit. What I code changes day to day. But yeah, we're still a smaller company. We're around
Mhm.
60 people right now. So with that, everybody needs to be hands on, building things, working on things. And it's interesting because the specialized knowledge that I've gained from building the first systems, I still know them the best, for better
Mm.
or worse. So when there's a certain bug that comes up, I might be the right person to fix it. So
Mm.
it's an interesting development as you go through that, I guess, leadership journey.
Yeah, there's definitely sort of a shift that happens in smaller companies to bigger companies. And I think that as somebody who leads people, you definitely have to think about things that you don't normally think about. But it's kind of nice. Like I enjoy being at a smaller companies where you're closer to decisions. As you go larger and larger, it gets harder to implement. And we're talking a little bit about things before in the pre-show and talking about how bigger companies have a harder time adjusting. You kind of saw a little bit of that in the way that OpenAI sort of broke in and was able to do things that much larger companies haven't been able to do. And I think that kind of leanness and swiftness really, is something that sometimes you need in order to really, I don't know, generate a lot of newness in the field. Definitely.
Hmm.
So every week I do this poll to see how people are doing, and I feel like I've no matter how I do it, I feel like I've always done like some sort of error, like I've made some sort of error doing the poll. So this week, the question was, what do you think is the biggest challenge developers face when considering AI tools and platforms? And you can see the answers here. The complexity of the tools, the lack of experience, uncertainty of employability, and ethical and regulatory issues. You can always see how I voted. I put ethical and regulatory issues just because I think that those are a big question mark and they can really shift sort of the direction of the industry. So that's what I'm concerned about right now the most. I don't know how that's going to pan out with so many people immediately trying to get in. But so, what are your thoughts about the poll? And from a practical sense, you work at a company that works with an AI in a practical way. How would you rate like all these different concerns for you?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting actually because all of these are real concerns that we think about through different lenses. So for lack of experience, I think that's a huge question. I think it connects a little bit to the employability part. Like we're
Mhm.
continuing to build more AI and ML features within Voiceflow. So the teams and are asking sort of how do I learn more about this technology? It's new. We're sort of traditionally
Ooh.
a design SaaS company. Now we have all this cool new ML and AI stuff in there. So we're going through our own journey of having team workshops and boot camps and sort of AMA sessions to understand how can we upskill our own team to go through this journey with us, as well as our customers. Because before we can help customers out, we need to understand what's happening in the space. Um, the ethical and regulatory issues, I think, huge thing. I think the technology is developing so quickly that regulations are still catching up to what it means. Even when sort of an earlier ML sort of wave happened in 2017, 2018, right? We still didn't figure out a lot of these things in terms of data privacy and redaction and data ownership and such. We saw that the EU and especially Italy have issued sort of more specific requirements of
Mhm.
what OpenAI and other platforms need to provide to be compliant. And I know Canada started looking into it as well. So a lot of things working here. A lot of questions from big companies too. Like there's a post recently about Samsung and some of their IP being leaked through the way that their team members are interacting with Chat GPT. So a lot of questions in this space. So I think it's top of mind for everybody too.
Yeah, I think that it definitely is. I think all these concerns. I was not surprised that the complexity of the tools wasn't necessarily top of mind because I've used, the Chat GPT, looked at the Chat GPT API at least, and it's fairly simple, but still that lack of experience with things, and I oftentimes have to learn things that are pretty much in documentation only mode, so you can only learn it by reading and trying to look through the different APIs and see what they do. There's not like a lot of training, and that's really challenging. And when everybody in the thing is so new that everybody in the company is trying to figure it out, and then the industry itself is moving so fast that just when you learned
Mhm.
it, somebody throws another like curveball at you. GPT goes from GPT-3 to GPT-4, and now in order to stay competitive, like now you have to go figure that thing out, or if like the regulation's another issue. With you mentioned Italy, if Italy decides to like outlaw Chat GPT, all of a sudden you as a company have to somehow respond to that, and that wasn't like in your plan. Like you literally didn't
Mhm.
weren't thinking that was going to happen. And I like Adam's comment here that he says that the first two results are sort of linked, lack of experience with complex tools, and the tools aren't necessarily the part that's difficult. Um, some people are concerned, though. You can see about the uncertainty of employability, so that's kind of interesting. I think it's more of a concern. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, but I don't know that we need to worry about it too much. We'll see how that's panning out. So let's talk a little bit about the things that you're doing at VoiceFlow. Um, because it's not just a good example of a solid web product, but also one that is able to use AI. Can you talk a little bit about how that works?
For sure. I'll tell a little bit of a story about that. So when ChatGPT came out, the leadership team came together and said, how can we use this new technology, does it make sense for our business? And there are a lot of questions because we're a design tool for conversational AI. So if you think about how do you design those experiences, it impacts our business in a very immediate fashion. So we're thinking about okay, there's this wave of conversational AI, but what about our customers? We have over 60 large enterprise customers using the platform. What do they want? What are they thinking about? So we did this hackathon week in December where we built out a couple of features, I'd say called five, and we built it based on the challenges that our customers had. So generating training data for these conversational assistants, variations, uh, figuring out if a customer doesn't get a response that they want, how do you gracefully handle that? So we tried to base all our features on customer requirements and then threw our own sort of perspective on it because it was so new. So once we did that, we got customer feedback, and then a couple of weeks after the launch, we were hosting a webinar talking to some of our largest customers publicly about what they like about the tool. So
Mhm.
it was sort of we guessed right based on our understanding of the market and the problems, but it's a continuous iterative process, sort of working with our customers to figure out what the priorities are and where they want to see these capabilities.
That's pretty interesting. So, basically, it looks like a tool for building the flow of how when people are interacting with another website, right? You can generate sort of the flow of what happens when people ask questions, correct? Is that kind of like what you're doing? And
Yeah, yeah,
it's a beautiful tool. I mean, it looks fantastic. I mean, it's amazing. And I can't believe that you just like, oh, it had a hackathon to figure out how you're going to implement AI. That's pretty slick. That's what we're talking about before, that your ability to iterate, and sort of turn really quickly into something new based on your understanding and then also just feedback from your clients. That is fantastic. That's amazing.
yeah.
So what can
And
you
we've been
say when you
thinking
talk
about.
about the sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say we were thinking about so we're designing these conversational experiences, whether voice or chat. Like how do these large language models come into play? So we've rolled out we call them AI steps. So you
Hmm.
can do this thing called prompt chaining, where you can connect different large language model steps together to generate a more powerful experience. So we started thinking about how do you prototype these like Chat GPT esque experiences within your use case, where you can have personas and various other um, sort of specific use cases that large language models enable. So yeah, we're continuing to evolve. Like every week, there's a new launch on the canvas as we're iterating and exploring. So,
And that's also like an exciting place to work. That I feel like doing the stuff that I do, which is basically creating like tutorials and stuff like that. That is always changing. It's same sort of thing happens. Like I could be recording a course, and while I'm recording the course, a new feature comes out, and I just have to tell everyone, okay, we can't really release this anymore, or pause everything everybody's doing, and we got to go first figure out what the new things are, and then be able to adjust to everything. So can you talk a little bit about sort of the technology, the stack, the things that you need to put together something like this that has like a really strong UI and UX, and then a lot of other features like ML and AI built in?
for sure. Um, yeah, so we there's various parts of our application. It's kind of interesting. So we have the main front end that we've built. It used to be called Creator. Now we call it the Conversational Experience Design layer. So that's a real-time collaborative canvas that can have dozens of people building applications at the same time together. So that
Hmm.
was quite a bit of an engineering effort for you to be able to go on the canvas together, like build something, then press undo, then press redo, then concurrently edit something together. So that was at least a year-long project to actually revamp that canvas to make it more powerful for some of our larger clients. So that was a huge piece of work that our front-end engineers put together. And our design team supported as well with how do you actually put that UI and UX together for undos, redos, collaborative editing, and whatnot. So the front end has a lot of complexity. Then you go into the back end, or we call it the runtime, where we've built out Voiceflow as a programming language. So it's not just that you put blocks on the canvas and then it's just a pretty picture. You can actually run and prototype and deploy that diagram that you've built for your use case. So building a programming language is hard. So you have all the complexity there that our runtime team has put together. And then you get into the ML side. So we use a combination of third party and our own models. So we use OpenAI models for a number of our features, but we also use our own models for helping users understand their data to create things more quickly, and also power the chatbot experience itself when we deploy. So that in itself has complexity of how do you connect to those services. And we've built out sort of this middle layer that we've called ML Gateway that allows our other services to connect to it and support with all those ML AI functions. So it's a fairly complicated product that we've had the pleasure of working on for the past 4 years, and it's been really fun. So
Wow, that it definitely sounds so big, and I can't imagine what it's like to like have to turn on a dime, depending on, things like Italy and other things, GPT, when new GPT comes out, or what sort of things I think have been really easy or difficult, like maybe some things that you thought, oh, this is going to be huge, and it was actually quite easy, or some things that were extremely difficult, and maybe discuss some of the struggle that you've had in building this kind of thing.
yeah, for sure. Uh, it's hard to say, right? So, for example, one of the challenges we went through is, should one assistant be able to be deployed to multiple different channels? So, let's say I'm building a chat assistant. Should I be able to deploy that same chat assistant to WhatsApp, SMS, web
Mm,
chat, all these different channels? And you get into this sort of challenge, like with mobile or web frameworks, that you suddenly have to support different specs, right? Like you have
mm,
the hybrid frameworks for like React Native to deploy to Android versus iOS, right? But they have different requirements. So if we're trying to support an application that runs on WhatsApp and SMS, right? Very, very different things that you can do on each, right? You can't really send images or videos on SMS, right? It doesn't work too well as an experience, but on WhatsApp, that's like pretty core. So that's been a challenge for us, and we've sort of been flip flopping back and forth. Is like, how do you launch experiences across different channels, or what UX hacks can you do where it's easy to maybe duplicate projects or add new features to that? So that's been pretty challenging, and we're continuing to refine on that. On the easier side, I mean, I think we are all pleasantly surprised how quickly we built out those OpenAI features and
mm,
integrations. Some of it was like just how easy it is to use their API. Some of it
mhm.
was, thankfully, we made some good decisions earlier with architecture and software design. Um, but yeah, it's we built it in a week. We shipped it. We actually went on winter
Wow.
holiday before it actually came out. So we were all kind of waiting there nervously, like, okay, will people like this edition that we've made? So it's yeah, it's one of those things with software and product development that you can guess at how much it'll take, but then you might get a bug that lasts 3 weeks, or it might just work on
Mm.
the first time, and you look at it and say, that is this supposed to work? Something must be wrong. Code never works on the first time.
Well, plus I think you have the added layer that you actually have clients that depend on this software. And so to like add something can be disruptive to how they're currently using the product. So that's something
Mhm.
that I think it feels sometimes like it's easier to build something new because you can just break all the
Yeah.
rules than implementing a new feature has, potential issues that you are not aware of because you weren't thinking about those things when you were just building. But yeah, as you mentioned, it's a good thing, and I'll maybe I'll talk to Logan, who was in here last week from OpenAI, and tell him, hey, you guys are doing really good with that OpenAI API. It is really friendly, and that's one of the surprisingly good things. That's a great. And you said you you're so daring. Did it like in a week before you went on vacation. That's great. That's awesome. That's very, very gutsy, very gutsy. So, where are you with GPT-4? Like, what was that transition, GPT-3 to GPT-4 implementation? And maybe talk a
Mhm.
little bit about what you like or don't like about the new platform from a developer's point of view, and maybe if you've looked at other sort of technologies.
For sure. Um, Yeah, so the initial release was based on the Chat GP or the GPT 3.5 API. The Chat GPT API, the Turbo one, came out I guess a month ago. I guess it's March or
Hmm.
end of February. Kind of hard to tell how fast things are moving. And then GPT-4 came out earlier. So we've shipped an update where you can select between the three models on your specific use case. So it's a challenge from a UX perspective because we want to give power to the user, but we also understand that we're largely a no code design feature. So exposing those intricacies of large language models has its own complexity. And if I'm just looking to like summarize what the user said, right, adding all these knobs and dials introduces some questions. So that's kind of a trade-off we're thinking about is how do you add power and sometimes complexity versus sort of the simplicity of a no-code tool.
Hmm.
Um, so where we are with GPT-4, so we expose to the user, you can use these three different models. What we found is GPT-4 is sort of as expected, quite slow, right? So
Hmm.
for a chat experience, when you're talking to a chatbot, if you have to wait 20 seconds to get a response, right, it's not great. A user is going to close that tab, they're going to log off, or they're going to type something else. Not a good user experience. So we're taking that into account because latency is super important in our use case. So we are using users can use GPT-4, but they need to know that trade-off, and we indicate to the user some of the trade-offs between the different models. For other use cases, it's interesting that there hasn't been a clear benefit from using GPT-4 over 3 or ChatGPT. I actually gave a couple talks on this before from like a developer testing and integration side. So yeah, some use cases GPT-4 is much better. In other cases, GPT-3 or Chat 3.5 are the same. So it becomes a question of developer time. Do we just build a new feature or do we go back and refactor and test our existing ones? So a lot of trade-offs there with using the different models, but yeah, GPT-4 is a very cool.
Yeah, I really like what you did there, giving people options because people do want to know that the newer things are available. Everybody gets excited about them. And giving them that option is going to show them that I agree with you. GPT 3.5 Turbo is just really nice. It's nice to get the answers right away. But what about things like hallucination and some of the issues that appear just part of the model? How do you control that and make sure that things are perhaps more accurate, especially when a chatbot that is tied to like a company's information is a little bit different than just, if it gets my name wrong or, doesn't know where I'm from.
Yeah, for sure. So we think about our AI features in sort of two categories. We have creation time and we have runtime. So creation time is when you're on the tool and you're building out your designs. And in that case, the domain expert who's building out the design has full control of what's going into the assistant. So if it generates some data that's not great, the user just hits X, right? They don't have to accept it. So you have that expert in the loop, which I think is the best current context for these large language models. We then run into the runtime questions of what if you deploy this with an AI step, right? So this is where we want to provide both our customers and their end users clarity that this is an AI step. So if you're interacting, you'll see a little icon that pops up that says AI, right? And it's very clear that this was generated by the AI step. So if it hallucinates or something else happens, there is some transparency there of where this happened. We also have like our when you sign up for the AI steps, there's like a terms of service that pops up being like, here are the risks of using these models. This is what's going on. Um, I think that for end user use cases, we still have to be very careful with large language models, given that they're trained on internet data. We still don't fully understand how they work. And just when people try to make trade offs with like speed or usability, you sometimes lose those other bounds. So we have a couple of techniques we use in house, like how we prompt the large language model to generate responses. We do some validation as well, but for now it's still in the early phases, and I think we'll continue to evolve and improve how we use the models.
That's super interesting. So let's talk a little bit about how it's perhaps affected your job as a developer. Like, are you using any of these AI tools internally? Everybody has seen GitHub Copilot and other tools like that that can really help developers. I know that I look stuff up on Chat GPT all the time. How has it affected your day-to-day work as a developer?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I actually don't spend a lot of time using AI tools.
Hmm.
There's a number of people on our team who do. So a lot of our team uses Visual Studio Code, uses Copilot there, especially the teams working on JavaScript. They found it quite
Mm.
useful. Um, I work sort of within PyCharm in a Python environment. I haven't tried any integrations there, but for some of the problems that I've tried to use ChatGPT and GPT-4, I find that sometimes I need to spend more effort describing the problem to get a good answer
Mm.
than I do actually thinking about it myself. So um, I still haven't found like a perfect case for it, but the programming I'm doing nowadays is like debugging a complicated piece of code. So very, very, very difficult to convey to a large language model. Like, what am I trying to do? What am I trying to accomplish? I'm doing this weird data transformation, right? So I can paste my code into these services, but then there's also always sometimes a risk of like what is the data terms for these platforms as well, because have to be careful with IP as well.
Mm. That is really interesting, that you said that, that looks like the JavaScript developers use it more than maybe the Python developers. Python as a language seems to be more stable. It's been around for a while, and it's not like JavaScript is crazy. Like, you have 20 ways of doing the same thing, and each of them have different sort of, I don't know, issues, and also it's changing all the time, especially if you implement any frameworks. So the fact that it's like a model that is based on like September 2021 data and before, that's crazy. Like, that's unusable normally for a JavaScript developer. However,
Yeah.
there are newer things that mitigate some of that, and I saw that Google is working on a code search type of algorithm, which looks really interesting. I tried it out. It's not perfect. It's still very definitely in beta. I think that those tools are going to get better, but yeah, I can see where there's a feeling of we're in a transition mode, but people are experimenting. Good to know that some of your, if somebody's using VS Code, it's just really easy. I I'm welcoming GitHub Copilot X, which is kind of their newer thing, just
Mhm.
because this is actually how I've been using GPT the most. So the before Copilot X, what I had been doing is basically using ChatGPT to have a discussion, like a brainstorming discussion about the problem that I was trying to solve before I went into Copilot proper, and asked specific questions about the code that I was working on, because at the time, like, just regular Copilot has a good idea of the context of the thing that you're working on, like the code that you're looking at. Whereas, something like ChatGPT had a better idea of, it's fantastic for brainstorming, for generating ideas, for getting, some code to come up. I mean, I use Stack Overflow like a lot less now because I can look
Mhm.
things up very quickly. And that ability to kind of talk to somebody and have it be like a pair programmer or like a brainstormer is really nice. And when this new version of Copilot was announced, I was really pleased because that's exactly how I use it. I wonder if your JavaScript developers use it for in some of the same ways, uh, in how I found that it was useful for me. So this concept of like no code and low code have been around for actually before all this AI craziness like came about. They've really become part of life, but I feel like there's still a lot of demand for developers. Can you talk about the impact that some of these tools, not specifically AI and ML, but specifically like low code and no code tools, have on the demand for developers?
Yeah, for sure. So it's kind of hard to say, right? Because you'd have various we can talk about it empirically, but you have various studies that have come out. So Microsoft published a paper that talked about like 50 to 60% developer productivity improvement. Then Google published one. Google actually published it first about like a 3 to 18% productivity depending on the use case. So even the way that you study and try to measure it is different depending on the company. So based on the lower bounds, let's say Google's paper, then we can say here, yeah, there are the numbers. Um,
Hmm.
on the Google paper, we can establish that as a lower bound. So we know that there's going to be some increase
Hmm.
in the number, the productivity of developers, and I think we've all felt that it can do some pretty cool stuff. In terms of the demand, there's probably been some jokes and memes going around, right? Of you put something into Chat GPT, right? Rather than spending 5 hours writing it, you spend 1 hour, but then you spend 24 hours debugging it rather than 2 hours, right? So it's kind of interesting as a UX feature when you trust these models to produce good content. You might not be as careful with your testing, right? Because you're like, oh, this magic model gave me exactly what I wanted for, but there's like one hidden assumption in there or issue, and then suddenly you have to figure that out. So it's still very important to understand how the code works and the details. So I think what will happen is we'll move more into like a test and verification mode. So I actually posted about this on LinkedIn maybe a month ago, but I think this will bring the resurgence of test driven development. So you can imagine that you run your test cases, let's say 100 test cases, and you start writing the skeleton of your code. The code assistant completes it. And then based on the tests, you can verify if it works or not. So you're, as the person providing the requirements and the skeleton framework, and then the code is being filled in. And I think just based on the paper that you pulled up, certain tasks for less specialized domains or workers, these models do a better job on, just based
Hmm.
on what they've trained. So it's a complex problem to think about. I think we'll spend less time doing sort of cookie cutter tasks. I think there was a comment in the comments actually about this. So if you're doing a sort of generic create React app, like I think that these assistants will do a great job because there's so many examples of it. But when you start getting into complex production use cases and even thinking about security, most hackathon projects on the internet that a lot of these models are trained on don't follow great security practices. And there's a number of papers about those as well, about how you can introduce exploits into code based on how they're being used with large language models, the prompts that are being used. So super interesting about that trade-off is that there's always going to be ways to introduce errors and create problems or have to fix security issues as we go through this journey. So I think we'll get much faster about writing cookie cutter code, but the more complex problems, you still need somebody very experienced to define and understand what's going on.
Yeah, definitely great marketing sort of for the companies that are developing these things that they are having an impact, but the closer you get to like real code, the harder it is. And like you said, they can have, just a negative impact in the amount of time it just takes you to make sure everything's okay. I mean, when it generates things for me, I know that I have a hard time especially when I know that it's incorrect. I'm wondering if somebody doesn't know that this code doesn't work, what happens then? Like, do they try it? And then what happens when, they believe that it's still the correct piece of code? I know that I call it like a very assertive sort of way that it tells you the information. You tend to believe it because you believe it as an authority figure, even
Mm-hmm.
when it can be completely wrong. So that's definitely something that people have to watch out for, because you right now you can't rely on it for a lot of things. And that's a good point about the hackathons, that a lot of the code that it's maybe, where the stuff is coming from isn't necessarily like the best code. Definitely, yeah, none of that code has any sort of security uh, sort of approach
Yeah.
to it. So so what does that mean for a future where we now see AI doing like a lot of things that developers used to do? I think that I saw one of the posts that you did about AI eating software that I thought was super interesting. and you basically had this graphic right here that the what's happening is that the cost of developing software is actually collapsing. I don't know how good this graph is or where the data comes from. Can you talk a little bit about your ideas on this?
Oh, so this wasn't my post actually. I was
But you're
commentating
reposting something, yeah.
about my actual criticism was it was a very steep line, right? The
That's so
call out was
crazy.
that, yeah, our developers going to be paid $10 a year in 2025.
Yeah, that's
I think the
crazy.
answer is no, right? So somebody here came up with some numbers. I don't think they're very good.
Hmm.
Um, but it's a good question to think about. And we can look at historical examples. I think quite a few people have been posting about this, saying what happens when ATMs came out, right? Did ATMs make bank tellers obsolete, right? Or did the complexity of the world rise where we still needed bank tellers, even more specialized workers to handle more complex questions? We can think about Excel and sort of bookkeepers and accountants, right? We've had an increase in the number of financial analysts and accountants since Excel came out, as opposed to before it. With programmers, I think it's still pretty interesting of what your job is going to be, because even in programming, the tech stack changes every couple of years, right? Before, when you run things in production on a web server, you might be dragging and dropping an executable from your laptop onto a server, right? We don't do that anymore, right? We have this whole CI/CD process that we do with
Hmm.
continuous delivery multiple times a day, right? And that's a much more complex system to set up. So the developer who might have been super productive 10 years ago, right, is obsolete potentially now, unless they evolve. So this is kind of a relates to another question there about advice for people, is that I think one of the things that being a developer or coder forces you to do is technology changes so quickly, your skill set becomes obsolete so quickly that if you apply that same mindset to any other profession, you are suddenly becoming like very excellent in your craft because you're just spending so much time learning and improving. So a lot of professions, right? You've been doing the same thing for 20 or 30 years. You're going to rely on that exact pattern of work. And if anything disrupts that, that's concerning, right? For you as
Hmm.
somebody who's working, and also your ability to find new work. But if you apply that skill set, saying, okay, I'm working even as, I don't know, a doctor, a lawyer, um, or accountant, or any profession, or even the hands-on professions as well. I think those are a little bit safer from AI disruption, right? But if I'm a lawyer, am I upskilling on the current practices in the space? Do I understand how IP is being affected, right? How do I understand how data sovereignty is being affected by all these systems, right? And if you apply that iterative and continuous learning process, right, suddenly you might become the expert in a field that has very few experts because it changes so quickly, right? So, yeah, I think programmers and generally the world is moving faster and faster, so we just have to keep up, and it's tiring for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think that definitely the real skill for a developer is not only the ability to adjust to new things constantly, and constantly like be learning, the ability to, you know, like as you mentioned when GPT-4 came out, you guys had to just dig deep into what the changes were, try out the implementation. I don't think that's necessarily something that the computers will be able to do effectively because it's more of a conceptual type of thing. Like you have to make decisions about how do we implement this. We could just make everybody use GPT-4, but that doesn't seem right. I've heard that sometimes like the GPTs try to please people too much and give you an answer quickly, whether that answer is good or not. But we know that in real life, you make decisions and those things have consequences. And sometimes the ability to make the decisions is the real skill. And I like what you mentioned about spreadsheets. I remember I saw a special of when they developed the first spreadsheet. I think it was like actually for an Apple machine, and they showed it to like the two people that came up with it showed it to an accountant, and they said that the accountant pulled out his checkbook and his hand was trembling because he says, "What I do all day is what we call run the numbers, which is basically what a spreadsheet does," and he just couldn't believe how much this was going to help him do things a lot quicker. And as you mentioned, we didn't get less accountants. Like we got more people doing things in a different way. And the way that I like to think about it is when we figured out how to do shipping in a much more efficient way, what we ended up with more shipping. Like in the days when, like when I was a kid, things used to take like 4 to 6 weeks for delivery, right? Now, if it doesn't come in 2 days, you're already complaining to Amazon, like, why is it taking so
Yeah.
long? We've gotten used to this new thing, and I think we're going to see something similar, that a better systems in getting rid of some of the mundane complexity of programming is going to just give us the ability to do more faster, better, and in a more complicated way. So the real skill as a developer ends up being that ability to adjust, that ability to make decisions, and perhaps some of the things that computers are good at doing, being able to brainstorm, I think is a good thing. Massively process data, summarize, I think is one of the reasons I use GPT for quite a bit. The ability
Mhm.
to be able to crunch a lot of things and simplify them. when I take my
Yeah.
when I got my master's, I remember I used to have one of my teachers would always assign us like 5 different papers to read, and then he would have us summarize them in 4 bullet points, just to be mean. Not 5 bullet points, but four. And I always thought that would be like a no brainer for like a Chat GPT. It would do that in no time. But that was
Mhm.
always difficult because it was the fourth bullet point or whatever. The not
Yeah.
having like a bullet point for the fifth paper that always made it complex. So talk a little bit about your vision for the future. Where is this all going? How much longer do we have as people? Do you see AI completely taking over? Eventually. I mean, not today, but eventually. Do you see it getting to a point where they're going to take over? So what's your take on that?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to highlight is that people talk a lot about like AGI and future AI
Mm,
problems. Um, I think we have a lot of problems in our world today that we need to solve, right? So a lot of things regarding climate change, social
mhm,
issues, food insecurity, right? The list goes on. Political polarization, so many things that affect our world today. So when I look at those problems and I say, is AI the best way to solve that? For me, the answer is usually no. There are other methods to solve these issues than waiting for some AI god, for lack of a better term, to
mm,
save us from this. So that's my general thinking, is that AI and ML is great. There are a lot of good use cases, but we shouldn't get caught up in the potential future problems it might cause. I think it's very important to focus on current challenges and some of the issues that we've seen ML and AI models make, right? So hallucinations can be very harmful. There's been stories about people unfortunately ending their lives after talking with chatbots, sort of based on the interactions they've had. We've had people be put in jail for crimes that they haven't committed. So a lot of these social harms, we have to be very careful about them. So as practitioners, we need to think about, and builders of these systems, what is the impact of AI and ML on the world? Um, on the other side, I think that many companies aren't ready for this future, right? So if even if we talk about the Chat GPT plugins, right, which I think is a very cool
mhm,
technology, um, most companies do not have good APIs available to consume through such an interface. So many companies still depend on paper, still depend on facts, still have sort of ancient protocols that they're running on, protocols that are older than you and I, and sometimes combined. Um, so when we talk about AI is going to change the world, I say, well, does your bank, does your healthcare provider, does your grocery store, does your transportation agency, do they use modern technologies? And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, okay, let's solve that first, right? Let's get them to the point where everybody has like great mobile or web access to these services. Let's modernize that. And that's sort of the missing step, right? Like you can't have Chat GPT plugins powering your interaction with X store or X service if there's no good APIs under the hood. So I think this is kind of the challenge with these like waves of excitement, is that we miss some of the steps in between. Like super exciting technology, but if you don't have the prerequisites, right, it's more of a sales pitch than a practical scenario.
Yeah, and I love. I don't know if you've seen the movie I, Robot. It's a little bit of an older movie, but I love this part where you know, the AI that this person that created all these robots, uh, it has generated to talk to the police officer after he's gone, that AI is waiting for the police officer to ask him a certain question. And when he
Mhm.
answers, he says to him, like, that's the right question. You've been asking the wrong question all along. And what I love about that is that I think that when I watch a lot of people sort of talk about AI and what's going to happen eventually, they're really asking the wrong types of questions. Like, there's a lot of ways, especially in being able to process like large amounts of data. I think that's a really interesting thing. Um,
Mhm.
I can ask GPT to brainstorm with me, say questions for something like this, like an interview, and it could do that all day. Like it's hard for me sometimes to come up with like 10 good questions, but I can ask ChatGPT to like give me 100, give me another 100. What about it? Like it's so good at doing that, and it's so much better than
Mhm.
I am that I think like if you can find things where you can leverage the technology, don't be asking like GPT the meaning of life right now. It doesn't know. It's gonna make something up, and
Yeah.
but if you understand the technology, that's the wrong question to be asking right now. What you should be asking is what does it do well, and how do we use that, to benefit humanity? Stop getting upset about the answer that you're getting. It's not that smart. And as you mentioned yourself, like if you're a developer and you use ChatGPT, you know that it's not that great as giving you the right answer all the time. So
Mhm.
although it is helpful, you need to make sure that you understand, the technology and what it can actually do versus like you mentioned, like the GPT is not God. It's not gonna figure out how to do everything. And don't be asking it things that, are really not questions that it was designed for. So what about the
Mhm.
opportunities for somebody who's maybe trying to get into this field? Where do you see like the biggest needs or, opportunities for someone, in ML and AI? And maybe what do you see as some things that are potentially going to go away? I think you've mentioned a couple of them, things
Mhm.
that we don't necessarily need to be doing anymore. Do you think that, I mean, you guys, yeah, have a beautiful UI and UX design, like is are we've seen like some of these models generate beautiful artwork. There's like a lot of models that are now giving you entire websites. What do you see, sort of as the opportunities and things going away?
For sure. I think tying this in as a consumer of this technology and maybe as an onlooker, it's important to understand what's a demo and then what's live, right? So I think
Mm,
it's very easy to put together like a beautiful demo, but once you launch the product, you start getting into all these complexities. Like for example, in our case, like how do you go from single user to multi-user management, right? Like it's a very different architecture on your platform. So hard problems still need smart and hardworking and empathetic people to solve. Um, from an advice perspective, I think in general, my advice is build things in practice. So, like, use the tools that you think you're interested in. If it's technology, code something up, build a product, like release it to the world, play around with it, right? Build those skills. Find mentors to help you out. Like usually, what I've said is if somebody's built a project and wants me to take a look at it, I'll do it, and I'm happy to help. But most people never take me up on the offer, right? There is
mm,
something about not following through and taking advantage of some of the help out there that I think a lot of people forget. So really be diligent and make an effort to do so. And it's interesting. There's a couple comments in here about specialization versus generalization, and I think that we do need people and teams that are cross functional to solve these challenges, right? So I'll give you an example of in education, a common assignment, and you kind of referenced it earlier, is summarize this or write a 1,000 word essay. Now, the question is not, oh no, ChatGPT disrupted it, but the question should be, was this ever a good task, right? Was this ever a
mm,
good task? And what made it a good task, right? We sort of, in the education space, think about synthesis and critical thinking, right? But in when these tools are available to do this, is this still a good task? In the programming space, a lot of people love giving out lead code questions for interviews, and I don't like them for a number of reasons. One of them is that I'm not very good at them. But that aside, I don't think memorizing them is a very good indication of real world problem solving and building software products. So I've never asked them, but now you have GPT-4 solving these questions left, right, and
Hmm.
center. It can pass a lot of these interviews. So suddenly companies are freaking out and saying, well, how do I know the candidate wrote that code and solved that problem? GPT-4 can give such a convincing explanation and walk me step by step and find potential bugs. And my question is, well, why did you think it was a good interview technique in the first place, right?
Hmm.
So I think it's important to reflect on what the world asks of us and all these different things that we do and what's important. A little bit of an abstract answer, but going to specific roles, I think doing things in the real world super important still. So skilled trades, great career paths for a number of reasons. There's a very interesting book, BS Jobs, that was written for the redacted version of the title, which talks about different job classifications. And I think what's super interesting there is that the the jobs that we typically might refer to as like middle management or filler jobs, right? I think those might evaporate because suddenly coordinating meetings or putting together a quick presentation or a summary, right? You don't need people to do that because GPT-4 can do that for you. But the people building the core systems or working with other people or building real things in the world, right? Yeah, there we go. Unredacted version. I don't know what this show is rated, if it's PG or 14A.
I guess we'll find out now that you brought up this book.
We'll find out. Um, but yeah, so it's a lot of questions about what jobs exist in society and sort of what we're doing, right? Because I think a lot of large companies struggle to innovate. Cause we touched on this a little bit of times, is that you get caught up in sort of the bureaucracy and what's happening with like internal company politics, right? If you're a company of 200,000 people, that's like a medium-sized town. How do you coordinate people working effectively together? Like suddenly your
Mm,
job becomes sort of coordinating and managing expectations and all that rather than building the product. So I think we're going to see a huge evolution there. But at the same time, like these powerful ML models enable small companies to do things that we couldn't do before, right? So a number of years ago, I was saying there's like 3 to 5 AI companies in the world, right? That can do real machine learning, that have the technology, the skills, the budget, the talent to do all these things. And suddenly there's an API available, and you have hundreds or thousands of startups launching every day using this cool tech. So accessibility for this tech is very interesting. We've seen a huge improvement with open source models. I mean, Hugging Face has done a huge job
mm,
adding to that collection, but also just these closed sourced APIs. So it allows you to move much more quickly rather than spending so much time like tuning your own model or configuring it. Similar to cloud, right? You don't have to buy a server anymore. You don't have to
mm,
build your own ML model. You just go use an API, which I think is very powerful for the use cases where ML and AI are applicable.
mhm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that definitely I love some of the posts that you've been doing, and people should really follow you. There's a lot of really great mentoring type content that you've written about. So I don't know if I can make this a little bigger, but talking about what should people really sort of do if they're trying to break into this industry. And I love this post that you made about, maybe you can talk a little bit about it, how, companies are hiring bakers, but if you show up at an interview and you only know how to cook eggs, yeah, this is a really great post. Can you talk a little bit about what you're thinking here?
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's a couple of ideas there. I think the first one is always come prepared to an interview. So if you're applying to Voiceflow, let's say, and I ask you why Voiceflow, or why are you interested in this, and you don't have an answer, I'm like, okay, maybe you didn't have time or whatever. But if you show up to the interview and I'm like, I read about your business, even if it was for 30 minutes, I built a project on your tool, And this is some bugs that I found. I'm like, wow, you are somebody who's detail oriented, organized, like all these things that most people say on their resumes, but you showed up with it, like you delivered. And it in practice doesn't take that much effort. Like you can build, again, Voiceflow being a little bit of a different case, but you can build a cool project on most tools for like 2 to 3 hours of work, right? And demonstrate your care and understanding and problem solving skills. You're not just a faceless applicant with your resume. And you can always reach out and ask, right? You can always reach out and be like, hey, well, what would impress you on an interview, right? Whether it's for this role or in the future, right? And you'll start noticing patterns. Like one of the things when I was finding my first internships that I tried to do is I tried to bring a portfolio, both digital, and I'd printed out some of the website or mobile apps that I'd bring, and I'd be like, this is what I built right here. There's no question about what I can do. I can show it to you. I can explain the code. So even taking a little bit of ownership of the interview process where you can demonstrate that, I think is very powerful. So it's a little bit different than sort of traditional school where it's like, here's your rubric, here's your
Hmm.
criteria, go get an A, right? It's there's still a formula. I think most
Hmm.
people just don't think about it that way. There's still like a clear step on how to impress through interviews, but it's very different where nobody's going to tell you like this is the checklist to go through. So I think just even unlearning some of the bad habits from school is an interesting exercise as well.
Yeah, I think like learning to work in teams, like with groups, like, building things, putting stuff up on GitHub and be understanding that process. Like those things are the things that you really learn from working with others. And you have some fantastic advice. People should really follow you, follow your LinkedIn profile. You really post quite often. I loved, I don't know, well, I don't know if you got to see last week, but I had Logan Kilpatrick from OpenAI, and he said that
Mhm.
he applied 500 times for his first
Yep.
AI job. I was like, what? I was like really proud that when I became an author, I applied 3 times, and I thought, what dedication,
Yep.
consistency. I changed my approach, and I think that that's kind of what got me the foot in the door. But being able to sort of, I don't know, be different and really show the type of person you are. And I don't think that AIs are ever going to be like that. They try to please us too much, I think. So I appreciate, yeah, I appreciate your advice. So let's take a few questions here that people have been really active in the chat, which is great. So let's see. We have some questions about, let's see, from Adam, me and you. He would love to hear your advice on the recent computer science. I think we've been discussing some of this in launching a software engineer or IT career, given the changing technological advice environment. I mean, there's got to be some things that you're looking for specifically, right? Like there are a list of sort of things that you want people to have besides like the soft skills. I think the soft skills are maybe like what differentiates you from other people. What are some of the technical skills that people should know?
For sure. Um, so I think it depends on the job, and this is kind of something I think through is different jobs require different levels of proficiency, and I think in some positions, whether intentionally or unintentionally, we fool ourselves as hiring managers to say I need somebody who can do way more than they actually need to do. So I think it's
Mm,
just understanding what the expectations are for a job. So for example, for Voiceflow, we usually hire interns or co-ops who've already had internships, co-ops, or relevant experience before, and it gets into the question of like, oh, an internship is like an entry level position. Why are you doing this? And the answer is we have certain expectations that we have for our students. We give them 3 projects to deliver to. Most other companies give them 1. We pay very well. We have a complicated system. This is the equivalent of a full-time job just for 4 months.
mm,
So we have clear expectations that we communicate to our students there. For other jobs, and I don't want to sound elitist at all. I know I'm coming off a little
mm,
bit like that. But for positions, I think it's just demonstrating the ability to build something. So
mhm,
it goes back to the earlier comment I made, but if you can build an API for a use case that you care about, whether it's, I don't know, sports or cats or whatever else, um, if you can demonstrate that you went from an ideation stage to building it to deploying it and you send me a link, I will chat about you about internships opportunities, right? Because
Hmm.
the level of commitment and dedication to do that is important, and it demonstrates those technical skills to build something relevant. So it depends on the job, I think, for those technical skills, but demonstrate that you can build something. And um, we have pretty high hiring requirements for some of our students or new grads, but I always try to make time for mentorship, because I know like people don't have access to all these things. So if people reach out for coffee chats, I try to respond as much as possible, try to
Hmm.
put on events to help people gain those skills. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to build something. Otherwise, like, why are we
Yeah.
talking here, right? So,
Right. Yeah, and I don't think you sound elitist at all. I think that there's a level of realism that you should be able to do the job, and the best way to prove it is by doing the job. Like, there's no substitute for building something and showing that you can work with something. You can look at a project, somebody's code in a project, and even if it's not perfect, you can see the type of person that they are, and you'll be able to tell whether or not somebody is the right fit for an industry that's honestly just has crazy amounts of change. It's not for everyone. Not
yeah.
everyone wants to be in an environment that is changing so much. So that can be frustrating. And I think that that's what I tell people that go into programming. Like, listen, this is not the job that you're going to have for like a long time, and it's going to be the same. This is going to be if you get it's basically how well can you deal with frustration, because the whole job is it's about how do you deal when something doesn't go wrong? Like, do you just get so upset that you can't function? Or do you go, okay, that's just a problem. I need to try different things. Maybe it's how they say the definition of being crazy is trying to do the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. You need a little bit of like, okay, I'm going to try something, but slightly different. And the ability to continue to work through the problems, I think, is what makes a true developer, the people that succeed. See it as something like exciting and something of a challenge and something that makes them happy to be able to solve a problem or think of a problem like in a different way. So this is an interesting question from Don. How do you think that AI ML adoption might change when it becomes easier to sort of make the AI more focused on specific data? I think that could be a problem, especially for y'all, that the information that people want to know from a company is
Mhm.
specific to that company, so that could be revolutionary for you. And I think that a lot of people have talked about smaller models and perhaps models that are more focused on like medical. What do you think it's gonna how will that adoption change?
For sure. So I think there's two main techniques that we've tried personally, and the research can talk about. Is the first one is, how do you inject more relevant content into the model itself? So there's a number of
Hmm.
different techniques there of fine tuning or model weight replacements, and some really cool stuff that's out there. But that's physically changing the model. The second approach is, how do you inject context into your
Hmm.
question to provide better answers? So these are kind of like information retrieval systems. So we built a bot on Voiceflow as a proof of concept it was a proof of concept. Now it's embedded into our in-app assistant, where you can ask it a question about Voiceflow, and it'll do a document retrieval against our like tickets, questions on our support channels, our sort of documentation page, and our website, and it'll find like the top 5 results. It'll then inject that into the prompt on the question you're asking, and then the large language model, Chat GPT, will then summarize that. So it's not pulling from sort of past training data. The answer should be right in front of it, but you're using that sort of good summarization ability to provide that answer. So um, you can either change the model itself or augment the information that the model has.
I think like how I mentioned, that is exactly the right question. That's how we can leverage what AIs are really good at, as opposed to asking the AI what's the best flavor of ice cream. It's just going to give you a statistically correct answer. Everybody knows. Everybody has a different version of that. So that's great. And just to close, I know that we're a little bit over time, so thank you so much for hanging around. Hamid repeated our thing, saying that the whole life of developer is frustration. Yeah, if you don't like being frustrated, then maybe this isn't the thing for you. So, and Adam here saying thank you, excellent advice, Dennis. I appreciate your time very much. Just a couple of notes. Make sure that you like and subscribe. You can go to go.rabo.org, TFIT, and that's where I keep track of all the previous guests and everything that's going on with the show. Next time we are going to talk to Matt Harrison, and basically a little bit more of a focused talk about reskilling and upskilling. So Matt Harrison is a Python and data science expert. He's corporate training. So we're going to talk specifically about upskilling if you're trying to go from your current job into artificial intelligence, or perhaps you are in school and you're trying to land the job. So that's going to be another great talk. Thank you so much once again for being on the show and taking your time, Dennis. I know you guys, there's probably like 18 tickets now waiting for you just because you hung around me.
I haven't checked Slack, so maybe somebody's messaging me. Who knows?
All right. Well, take care and we'll talk again soon, hopefully. Bye bye.